So I've thought about the 35 millimeter cameras that I use in my career as a wedding photographer, and I've put them in four sort of groups that we're going to talk through. And hopefully this video helps you understand how I see 35 millimeter cameras, because I want to help you figure out which camera would be best for you and your needs. But before we get into the list, let's talk about 35 millimeter film. 35 millimeter is a really important medium for a lot of photographers. It's the most common and historically dominant film format for still photography. 35 millimeter is very accessible. The rolls come in canisters of negatives that give you 36 exposures per roll. There's a really diverse ecosystem of cameras and lenses, which we're going to talk about today. Some are really inexpensive, some are very expensive. 35 millimeter tends to have a distinct film look with more pronounced grain than medium format film. It's also generally more accessible and affordable than medium format film. However, it does have limited resolution because of the smaller negative size, although I get great scans out of my film and have really no issues with resolution, but that is something to know. It can also be less forgiving than medium format film when you're scanning and printing, but I've also seen amazing results from my lab. And sometimes my lab has even sent me scans of 35 millimeter film that look like they could be medium format film scans. So honestly, when it comes to 35 millimeter film, I feel like there are a lot of advantages and not very many weaknesses. And if you're an event photographer or a wedding photographer and you're hoping to start shooting film and you don't really know where to start, this video is for you. When it comes to 35 millimeter versus medium format, I would definitely recommend starting with 35 millimeter just because there's less barrier to entry. 35 millimeter is sort of the sweet spot between quality, convenience, and cost. All right, so the first group we're going to be talking about is for beginners. Now, of course, these are all my opinions. These are all my made-up groupings, so please don't get offended by this. This is just me trying to explain how I perceive certain types of 35 millimeter film cameras. Okay, so this is the Canon AE1 program, and this was actually my first film camera. The AE1 is a 35 millimeter SLR film camera. It's manual focus, it has a Canon FD lens mount, and it's relatively affordable and easy to find. It also has a good construction, a solid build. It looks very retro and cool, but it doesn't cost a lot of money. And this camera is almost fully mechanical. It doesn't have autofocus, it's manual focus. Like other film cameras, you have to advance the film yourself. You have to wind the film when you're done shooting. You have to select the correct ISO depending on the film stock that you're shooting. This camera requires you to be really in tune with capturing images on film because you're basically in charge of all the settings and it's a mostly mechanical experience. The reason I think that this is a good camera for beginners is because you do have to sort of take the reins of the film shooting experience. So you really have to understand how to load film, how to expose film, how to wind film, and you're not really protected very much by the camera. The other reason is that cameras like this are pretty inexpensive. I think I got this one for $200. You can find similar cameras that are really affordable just to get your foot in the door with shooting film. Alternatives to the AE1 would be the Nikon FE series, Minolta X700, Olympus OM2, the Pentax ME Super, the Nikon FG. It really gives you the experience of shooting film, and I think that the images that come out of this, they're not necessarily the most professional looking, but you can get some really interesting images. This camera is old, and so I get some like light leaks, I get lots of dust, and it creates a really sort of gritty film feeling, or that idea of film photos that we think about when we think of film. If you get different copies of this camera, you might get cleaner results. But in my experience, this camera produces like an idealized version of what film would look like. It's not a camera that I would use for professional work, but it was definitely a fun camera to start learning film on. The next category is for professionals. Now, that being said, it's not just for professionals. It's my opinion. So for me, it's a camera that I would use for professional work and the one that I would recommend first for anyone who wants to use a 35 millimeter film camera for professional work. You can use it for fun. It's okay. This is the Canon EOS 1V, and this is the closest experience to shooting film with a modern digital camera that I've ever encountered. There's a lot that I love about this camera. It has autofocus. It has a Canon EF lens mount, so it accepts any lens with an EF mount, which is a lot of lenses, which is pretty cool. It's also auto winding, so it advances each frame as you shoot, and then once the roll is finished, it automatically rewinds it for you. This basically has every feature you could imagine out of a camera, except it's a film camera. So when I use this, it truly feels like I'm using my digital camera, but I'm shooting film. Alternatives to the 1V would be the EOS 3, which I also have. This is sort of my second copy of this camera. This is a much more affordable option than the 1V, and it gives you a lot of similar features. There's also the EOS 1N, which is another similar EF mount film camera. Other options would be the Nikon F system. If you are serious about adding film to your professional workflow, I would definitely recommend looking at a camera like the EOS 1V, the EOS 3, any of these cameras that I mentioned. These cameras are reliable, they are consistent, they produce incredible results, and they give you lots of flexibility with lenses, and they also can keep up with the fast pace of shooting a wedding or an event. Now, some downsides are this system is pretty substantial in terms of size and weight. I mean, it's a bulky camera. It's like a good feeling system in the hand, but it definitely is heavy. And depending on the lens you're using, it can get quite big. The EOS 1V has also skyrocketed in price. So this has become just really insanely expensive. I think it's actually doubled in price since I bought this one a couple years ago. So if price is an issue, I would definitely look at the EOS 3. It produces really similar results. And like I said, it's very similar to the 1V. You could definitely look at an EF mount film camera, or like I said, the Nikon F system looks really interesting as well. Okay, the next category again is gonna make some people upset. This one I have designated for artists, which I'm kind of kidding, but this is the cameras like the Contax G2 or the Leica M6. So these kind of like rangefinder style cameras. We'll start with the G2. This is like a similar form factor to the Leica M system, a lot smaller and lighter than the previous category we were just talking about, which are like more hefty cameras with bigger lenses that are SLR style cameras. This is the rangefinder style camera. The G2 is a pretty advanced camera. It has a lot of auto features, including autofocus. It has great lenses. It's self-winding, just like the Canon EOS 1V that I talked about earlier. So it'll advance each frame for you and wind the roll for you. And it does have autofocus, but these cameras are definitely more expensive than the SLRs I talked about a moment ago. The other thing about them is they can be a little temperamental, and so they're not always the most reliable cameras, particularly with the G2. Even though it has autofocus, I find that the autofocus is not necessarily the most reliable autofocus that I've used on a film camera. This is the Leica M6, so any of the Leica M cameras kind of live in this category as well. This is probably the king of expensive rangefinder systems, is the M system. This camera does have phenomenal optics and a really amazing user experience. Although, again, these cameras are not necessarily the most reliable. I got into a fight on Threads recently about this because I called the Leica M system unreliable. But in my experience, this has been the most unreliable 35mm camera I've ever used. I've had to send my other M6 back to Leica twice already since owning it, and it's been less than 2 years. Whether it's user error or not user error is kind of irrelevant. It's like out of all my cameras, this camera always is the one that's having issues. For me, that's unreliable, but they're beautiful cameras. I love the brand history of Leica. I love the experience of shooting with the Leica. The rangefinder system is also, in terms of focusing, more reliable for me than something like the Contax G2, even though the G2 has autofocus. I just know when I'm shooting with an M camera that my shot's going to be in focus because of the rangefinder system. So it's very rare that I would have an out of focus image when I'm shooting with the Leica M camera. And that for me is a huge benefit of using this over this. Now, that being said, the Leica M system is extremely expensive, and it's not necessarily worth the expense in a lot of cases. I think it's a camera that you really have to be passionate about and love the experience of it, and you have to love the history of Leica and sort of the brand identity that comes with owning one of these cameras. In the case of most M cameras, they're fully mechanical. So like the Canon AE1 and those that first group of cameras I was talking about, this camera does not help you really in any way in terms of mechanics. It really requires you to do the heavy lifting when you're making images. And that's a part of the experience of shooting with a camera like this. So for me, I really actually enjoy that experience. But it is something to know about these cameras that they're for, I would say, more advanced film shooters, just because if you start with a Leica camera, you might just be a little bit frustrated if you don't already have the experience of shooting film, just because there's a learning curve when it comes to shooting film. And so I wouldn't recommend a camera that could potentially get in the way of your initial, experience shooting with film. All that being said, this is probably my favorite 35 millimeter camera, just because of the form factor and the experience and the quality of the lenses. This camera has produced absolutely breathtaking images with 35 millimeter film, and it's just this small little box, but it makes some really magical images. I also love shooting Leica with flash on the dance floor because I find it's a lot easier for me to achieve focus and to sort of zone focus on the dance floor in dark situations than it is to use an autofocus camera. Even though I said that the Canon EOS 1V and those SLR cameras are more reliable for autofocus, they do have good autofocus in bright conditions, but in dark conditions, the autofocus really struggles. In darker situations, I would definitely prefer using the rangefinder system with a flash just to help when it comes to locking in focus. Some alternatives to the Leica M6 and the Contax G2 would be the Minolta CLE, the Konica Hexar RF, the Voigtlander Bessa R2 or R series, and then of course like any other Leica M cameras. And now our last category is for fun, and this one is going to be about point and shoot cameras. So I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that this is a good first film camera, or this is a good first film camera, like a point and shoot camera. And definitely if you have a family 35 millimeter point and shoot that's been passed down to you, this can be a great way to like get your foot in the door of like understanding the process of shooting film and sending it to a lab, getting it developed, getting back the scans, seeing what you like, what you didn't like. That's all great. These are cool because they're so small. You can basically like pocket this and take it with you everywhere. They have a built-in flash, which is really great. They're generally more accessible. They're not as expensive as other cameras. They also, of course, don't offer as much control or flexibility in terms of settings and things like that. So you can't really control the final image as much as other cameras, but typically they have good auto settings, so you don't really have to worry about that as much. Certain cameras like this, the Contax T2, can get quite expensive. The T3 is also extremely expensive. The little Yashica T4 has been great for me, but these are also climbing up in price. I know that there are some Olympus point and shoot cameras that are more affordable that people love. Point and shoots have actually kind of been taken out of my rotation of film cameras, so I don't really use them anymore. I tried them for a while and I liked them for dance floor, but I started to realize that I really just don't have a lot of control with the point and shoot camera. Certain point and shoot cameras you do have more control of, like the T2, for example, but I ultimately felt like the results from the point and shoot cameras were not giving me what I wanted. I didn't have enough control over them, and they weren't at the level of something like the Leica M6 or even the Canon cameras where you have that control. And so when I'm thinking about this from my perspective as a wedding photographer, point and shoot cameras just really didn't live up to my expectations. It's kind of like that first group of cameras, the AE1. It's not a camera that I would actually use for work just because of the sort of imperfections of that system. I feel that way about point and shoot cameras. And so I think that these are great for, for fun, for travel, for personal work. These definitely give like a fun 35 millimeter disposable camera kind of vibe in a lot of situations. And so they can feel more filmy and less pristine. So that's sort of my overview of 35 millimeter film cameras. And of course, you can pick and choose between all these. You can own one from each category. That's the really exciting thing about film photography, is there's this huge array of film cameras, especially with 35 millimeter film. You can get big professional cameras like this, or really tiny point and shoot cameras like this. There's this great variety of camera options, and it really impacts the final result that you get at the end of the day. I think one thing to also keep in mind is that you can make amazing photographs on 35mm film with any of these cameras. You just have to be shooting correctly. Each camera requires a different approach, and they all have their own strengths and their own weaknesses. So I think if you're getting a new camera, you should definitely spend some time learning that camera, testing it, understanding the controls, the light meter, really getting a feel for what that camera can do, and starting to understand where it excels and where it sort of falls short so that you can get the best results out of it. But as long as you're exposing your film correctly and you have a lab that you trust, you should be getting excellent results with any of these cameras. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there for today. Please let me know what questions you have down below in the comments. If you have thoughts about the systems that I've described, let me know which one you prefer and why. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. I'd love to see you at the next video. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye. Rososito. This is the beauty. Hold on, I gotta turn the microphone here.